So the question is, after the degree, what are you really willing to do that makes you happy? The world of equations and mathematics, it looks perfect. It's wonderful. You just look at these things and then you say, wow, it's very hard if you always stay in the same place with the same group of people to challenge what you think.
Welcome to EGR Pod, where engineers tell their stories. In this episode, we meet Luca Massasso, an aeronautical engineer and co-founder of BizBrain Technologies, a company that implements SAP solutions for supply chain planning. Luca holds the equivalent of a bachelor's and master's degree in aeronautics, as well as a PhD in aeronautical engineering with specialization in fluid dynamics, all from the Polytechnic University of Turin in Italy. Glad to have you here, Luca. I'm excited to hear the story of Luca Massasso deciding to become an engineer and what that path looked like.
Considering that I am in the age of wisdom, you need to put a starting point. Since when you want to know my story? Because it can start literally in the other millennium.
Yes, it's fine to go back to the other millennium. In fact, as a student coming up in the school system in Italy, when did you know you were going to become an engineer?
Engineering was a very early decision. So I come out of a family of younger parents. Neither of them had university experience at all. And they had me when they were very, very young. My mother was 19, my father was 21, 22. But they really had no experience whatsoever, academically speaking. Neither of them, again, had university degree, which means that they did some sort of technical school up to 18, 19 years old, and then they started working. And my father is one of those guys in a generation where they worked 35 years in the same company. They never changed. Very different environment from United States. And that was a time in which, I don't know anybody of your students interested in history. After Second World War, Italy was pretty much in a mess from an economical standpoint. And if it were not really for the Marshall Plan that was supported by the Americans, the economy wouldn't go up. But in that situation in which everything went up, one of the good things that happened is that education was still something that was considered a way for, let's say, regular people to improve their own economic condition. And in Italy, the school tradition was pretty old, because we are there since millennium. I just realized it many years later that, that there is this international PISA test. I never took any of them, of course, but what I've seen studying the problem in the recent years is that the best of our performance in Italy in the PISA test was exactly in the period in which I went to school. So I really got probably the best of that system at that moment in time. And during that period, especially in elementary school and in middle school, I ended up having very good teachers, and that had a very strong influence on me. And so already when I was in elementary school, I was very good at mathematics. Already at that point, I was saying, math, I like math. And of course, in my family, that comes from very practical background. If you're good in mathematics, you would never become a mathematician. You would never become a physicist, right? So my father was a kind of an engineer, and he was designing the pipelines from the dams are going to bring the water to the turbines and generate electrical power. So obviously engineering became, Luca is going to become an engineer. So engineering remained basically the constant influence from the family. But in reality, nobody knew what it meant to be an engineer. So, engineer that make houses and design houses, stuff like that, maybe. Mechanic engineer, no clue. So when it came to the age in which I already went through the high school, and the high school for us, Liceo, is a school where you study a lot of mathematics, but then we study also Latin, 5 years. And then a foreign language that was German for me. And then you study philosophy and you study philosophy and history for 3 years. Then you do biology and chemistry as well. So you come out of that program that probably is comparable to 1 year or 2 years into college in the United States. And you really had to do a lot of studies and homework and things. So it's really a job, to the point that if you want to be, for example, an athlete during that period of time, it's very much competing with the studies. So either you are becoming an athlete or you study, but you cannot do both. So then I had to decide, I have to go to engineering. So I'm from Turin. And Torino is also the place where Fiat is, right? And Fiat was the major industry in Italy for many decades, starting probably the beginning, 1910, up to my times. And so obviously that kind of industry needed to have a school preparing the engineers. Many of them did mechanical engineer, ended up into the automotive business. So the decision was, how do I become an aeronautical engineer? I believe at this point with my memory that I wanted to be a little bit different from the other guys. Everybody, well, my best friend went to civil engineering. He was going to build houses and studying cement. And at the end of the day, he turned into a transportation expert. But again, civil engineering, too boring because it's static, right? I never really liked houses and stuff. Plus, I always like outdoor things. And in Italy, one of the things they did in many places, they build too much and they destroy the environment. So I was not attracted to that. And for me, building highways was not attractive. Mechanical engineer, everybody wanted to be a mechanical engineer in Torino for the reason I was telling you before. So I excluded it. So I want to be different. And then electronic and aeronautic were the two. I was in between the two. And to be honest, I should have probably done electronics after what I learned after. But I studied with aeronautics. And there is no reason but this. If not, that maybe when I was a kid, I was building models of airplanes. They were giving you these little pieces in plastic. And I was doing, in Italian, it's called aeromodellismo. So I had these little models. I was painting them. And then I was bringing them into some exhibitions sometimes. So I did these kind of things. But other than that, I didn't understand anything about engines. I didn't understand anything about airplanes. So anything about that kind of machinery, I discovered during my program. And in Torino, there was, and there still is, a group called Alenia. And Alenia is actually building a lot of things around the aeronautical industry. And so there was also this idea of maybe doing something that could lead to a real job after the university. So it's not that I move into something just because of interest, but also because, well, there is in the future that to me looked like a very long future, some kind of potential exit towards the job.
So once you decided on aeronautical, how did that all play out? You went as far as getting your PhD. In Italy, was that a requirement in that field of aeronautical?
No. So what happened, first of all, I entered the first year with the very good performance of my exam from the high school, where nobody was expecting me to get such a high grade. And so I was a little bit like cocky. And when I went into the first year of university, I was thinking, I know it all and everything. I got beaten so bad the first year, right? And I still did my exams, but I really got beaten the first year. The second year also went kind of in that direction. And the third year was a bloodbath. My third year, I only gave 4 exams. And if you are starting to think about how many exams you need to give, these are 32 exams. So if you start seeing the distribution of how many exams you need to give, when you give only 4 in a year, you're late. So that was my third year, right? And that is when there was a little bit of a switch in the way I was studying. But that was the time in which I started studying different type of mathematical problems. So we started at the third year to really study the aerodynamics, fluid dynamics, and things like that. And I really got into it. And I was really so much interested in that world because the world of equations and mathematics and things like that, it looks perfect. It's wonderful. You just look at these things and then you say, wow, it's something I can control from beginning to end. My life was a mess all around, right? My family, I have a crazy family. And that stuff was beautiful. And so I said, okay, I like it. And I had very good professors. These are the people that really inspire me. I remember this professor that explained to me gas dynamics and how the turbulence occur using the metaphor of a candy in your mouth. And I remember how that came, right? They say, guys, people think always when they talk turbulence, they talk about viscosity and stuff. It has nothing to do with it. It's inertial decay. And how do you explain inertial decay? And then he starts speaking, you put the candy in your mouth, it's hard. Then you break it with your teeth, and then it's small little pieces. And then these are the vortices, right? And then the little pieces get smaller and smaller. Only at the end, viscosity enters. Only at the end, viscosity has nothing to do with turbulence. And one of these professors was a genius. His name is Germano. And you can find Germano at the Journal of Fluid Dynamics. That was a milestone in the field because he generated mathematical models to look for the way that the energy gets dissipated at that scale. And so you can do numerical simulation of turbulent flows with the models he developed. So when this stuff came out, I said, wow, this stuff is cool. I never even knew it existed. And so I want to do more about it. So what can I do? And then I started going around. I was not really the best student in terms of grades because I told you, the first 2 years I got beaten, right? So my grades were not too high. But it's really a matter of motivation. At the time, I was so driven. I had so much fire. Then I convinced them to give me the recommendation letter to go to Belgium. And so in 93, I was able to land a stage in this place in Belgium. It's called Von Karman Institute. And you probably know the head of the Apollo program. One of the important guys was Werner von Braun. Right? Werner von Braun had the wind tunnel on which I studied at the von Karman Institute. So when you go, you see, then you can see the history and all the things that have been done. The first helicopter, I think, flight in Europe was happening in that place where I was studying. And the von Karman Institute is still there, so people can check it out what it is, right? So I went there for a stage is in Italian. You call it internship. And that is towards the end of my program, but I didn't have the degree yet. So it helped me also to really understand what I wanted to do for my final thesis. And I basically work on doing calculation around hypersonic flows over elliptic wings at Mach 3. So I was studying the re-entry problem. It's something very cool from an engineering perspective. It's something super advanced. And I had a guy that was taking care of me, Stefan Zemsch from Munich, a very nice guy that took care of me, was my mentor. And then I went back, I did my thesis. Meanwhile, I already applied for the diploma course that would start on September 94. Still not graduated, I was admitted into the program. I defended my thesis. We call it defending also when you do the master program. So I defended my thesis in November 94. I was already 2 months into the diploma course program in Belgium. And then after I did that one, I did a PhD. It was really passionate. I really liked that stuff. It was pretty cool.
So you mentioned that before you started out, the two things you were thinking about were electrical and aero.
Electronic.
Okay.
Electronic and aeronautical, yeah.
And you thought that maybe you should have studied electronic, but you don't regret doing aeronautical.
Well, that was a thought that came. In the first 2 years, I got beaten, but the only exam where I really excelled was an exam called Physics 2, and we studied the Maxwell equation and electromagnetism. I did understand that stuff. Whereas, for example, Physics 1 is a little bit of everything. You do the traditional mechanics, but I don't know, they were throwing also the theory of relativity into it. That has nothing to do for me, right? So the best things that I really like, I remember, one was the exam on the electromagnetism that I love, and the other one was an exam on Lagrangian equation. So everything and the motion explained from the point of view of energetic balance, and also motion of planets and stuff like that. So all of those things for me, they were awesome. And basically they had to deal with fields. I really like fields a lot. So at that point I said, well, I maybe should have done electromagnetism at the time, but it was too late for me to change because aerodynamics came into the picture. And I said, okay, turbulence is still a problem that in physics they have not solved. Well, I guess I have a purpose in life at this point. I would solve it.
And of course you did.
And of course I did not. Of course I realized that there are more important things in life than this, but yeah.
So you got the PhD, and then what?
Oh, the PhD story is kind of interesting because the reason why I went for a PhD, it's because I found that the life of being a professor in the university, teaching students like me that want to do that, was something I wanted to do. And I couldn't be more wrong than that. In that period of time, for the PhD, I was sent by my professor, that's where you and I met, right? To work with this other Italian professor of the mechanical engineering department at UMCP that did that famous JFM paper with Germano. And the problem is that at the time, different from us, we were still on emails. I still remember that we were on VAX VMS systems at my university. And just the idea of people talking via phone between United States and Italy, no, you cannot do it. It's too expensive, right? So the communication between my mentor and the guy responsible for, let's say, my result of the PhD and this other Italian professor, they didn't go very well. And I found myself into a political mess between two people that were not in agreement on what my study was supposed to be. So already that really put me on the wrong foot for what had to be my future research in helping mankind to solve the turbulence problem, right? And so in addition to that, I worked that year basically in dark all the time, literally, because my lab didn't have any window. The company was challenging. We were really workaholic. I was living in a crazy room. So I was into that mess. And at the end of the day, during the period of time, I met my former wife. She's from Rio de Janeiro. So while I was doing my PhD, I go to visit her in Rio. And when I see Rio de Janeiro, I say, okay, how can I come to work here? My qualification to find a job there were really not fitting the place. And then I started thinking, okay, after my PhD, what job can I get? What can I learn? And when I talked to some of the professors that were reviewing my thesis and they were part of the committee, one of these guys said, Luca, if you want, I can put you in contact with the Fermi lab in Chicago. I said, okay, cool. So what do they do? Oh, they study nuclear explosions numerically because, there is a ban, we cannot have nuclear explosion, et cetera, et cetera. And I was thinking, oh my God, So I tried to avoid, war application for so long. I did the turbulence because it was good for this. Then there are so many applications for the war industry in that department, right? And I wanted to stay away from that. So basically I said, okay, maybe I should drop everything I'm doing and do something completely different. So I spent from November 96 to November 97 in Maryland. Then I go back, I finish my thesis, I put something into the thesis. It was not really, a good piece of work, to be honest. And then on March 98, I basically go through the exam, telling everybody, I'm not interested in becoming a researcher. I'm not interested in becoming a professor. Bye, I'm leaving. So what are you going to do? I have no idea, but I'm not going to do this job. So that's the summary. Is that a good story?
It's a great story. I can't wait to hear what happened next.
Okay,
so you had nothing to do. You were done. You had done all of this.
So I basically bought a ticket and I came back to the United States. I stayed there with Anna for a while. And then after 3 months, of course, you had an entry and a European said the visa waiver, but I didn't know anything about immigration rule. And so now the point is, how can I stay there? And that is 1999. And so in 99, I tried to find a job over there. And I was also thinking, okay, should I do an MBA and stuff like that? I took the GMAT twice. And twice I got pretty much the same result, which in mathematics I was, 98, 99%. And it was a disaster on the verbal and English communication skills. So I didn't make it in. And also my story did not make sense. Thanks God they didn't accept me into that. I'm really serious. And in that process, I was looking for jobs all around. And the only jobs that really became very close to happen was in the Maryland area. There is the technology corridor. There was a company that was a joint venture between SAIC and Rolls-Royce, and they were doing something very uncommon. These guys were designing and realizing simulation for nuclear plants. Every nuclear plant by regulation needs to have an exact replica of the control room where you are running the nuclear plants, because you need to train the teams that are running the nuclear plants. That was a global regulation. There were a few different things in South Africa and other places, but every new nuclear plants needed to have something like that. And of course, they needed a guy that understood how fluids behave, because there is a lot of water, hot water into those plants. So you need to model them on computers, and the computers are connected to this machine. It's pretty cool work. It didn't happen, because that was also the year of the Y2K, and the companies were not willing to put money on these things. And we are talking about the huge companies putting money in power plants, things like that. So because of lack of budget, I didn't land the job. Meanwhile, in order to be able to stay with Anna, we decided, okay, let's get married. Let's not tell anybody. We get married. So I just basically come in. I'm there a few months, and then a friend of mine from London gets in touch with me and tells me, hey, Luca, by the way, are you working? And I said, no. Would you like to work as an analyst for Gartner? Gartner, the market analyst. At the time, it was called Gartner Data Pro. It was not as big as now. Then they had merger and acquisition. But then basically they gave me a job I could do remotely. It was one of the first probably ones that you could go on a global scale in a remote way. We are talking, more than 20 years ago. And essentially, I was supposed to write reports explaining the hardware and also the software solution for the graphic workstation that were used at the professional level. So similar to Silicon Graphics, if you go back in time, anything that was supporting very advanced form of AutoCAD and things like that needed to have a specific hardware. And so, the time I also get for fun, because otherwise I wasn't really working full time or anything serious. So I write, I believe, 3 or 4 of these reports for them as a freelancer. And there was the problem that you couldn't really be paid as a payroll being United States according to an American payroll. So they were actually paying me, because UK was still part of Europe, they were paying me to an Italian bank at the time. And I was using the credit card over here. So I was not really in violation of any labor law. And I could support myself this way. Until at a given point, a contact came from a guy that was in Palo Alto. And I never been in California before. I never knew anything. And he talks to me, and then he asked me for a resume. And he said, why don't you come over for a visit here? And Anna, my former wife, at a conference in San Francisco at the time. So I just packed a few things. I go there. As nothing was landing, I was not expecting much. And I remember that after the 10th person I'm talking to in the campus of SAP in Deer Creek in Palo Alto, I said, hey guys, look, you told me what the job is about, but you didn't ask me questions. And I said, well, if you are here because you're already qualified, don't worry about it. So I come back from that trip, I go back to Italy to visit my mom. Meanwhile, I met this friend of mine that was my contact that is from Torino. The guy said, look, they're interested in moving forward. Do you want to take a position? Maybe it's not as cool as the job you were doing before, but we need people developing software. And then how I landed the work at SAP at the time. So that's how the conversion basically happened. But I was completely ignorant about really where the market were. I mean, the market around Washington, D.C. was not really good for me. There were a lot of things that have to do with, even at the time, clearance stuff. There was something around computer science and coding and stuff like that. I did an interview in Falls Church. It didn't go very well because they asked me a few technical things about pointers and stuff in C++ that I couldn't answer very well. So I didn't have that job. But man, coincidence, then I went into SAP. I'm still doing SAP after 23 years or so.
So hearing you talk about it, it sounds like everything fell into place despite different setbacks or uncertainties. But at the time, what do you think it was that kept you looking for the next thing or kept you going? Some people might say, oh, I've got these problems with figuring out how to become a citizen, or I have problems with finding a job, and it becomes
I think that the main problem that I can see for everybody is that whenever you're growing up and you're young, you don't really know what the market has, and you are choosing a career on the basis of interest, but you don't really understand what is the day-to-day job. If I had to do things again, if not for what I was able to have in my life, I have a daughter, and I mean, in general, my life is fun because I travel a lot. I don't complain, but I think that for a person like me that wanted to have always control on what was my life, I mean, from the story, you understand that there was no control at all. So, I mean, there was no plan. Things happen. And so is it really good to do it that way? I wouldn't recommend to anybody. So in fact, what I would recommend to younger folks is, okay, you understand that you have an inclination towards maybe a job where you deal more with people, or where a job where you have more individual contribution, you like to think, you like to analyze a problem, you have analytical skills. That's the inclination. But you need to compare that with the daily life after the degree. So I would tell everybody to go, get the people that are doing the job that you think you would like to do, and understand what that job is. Not from the point of view of what are the things you need to learn. Because as a young person, you can learn anything. Let's start from that perspective. Some people believe that they cannot learn math. If math is well explained and somebody explains why sine and cosine exist and why they were developed, everything makes sense. The problem is that when they throw things at you without telling you the reason why, anything looks horrible. So it's a matter of who's teaching you and how they teach. So everybody can do anything. So the question is, after the degree, what are you really willing to do that makes you happy? Unless your purpose is life to make money, which is the other thing. What makes you happy is make money. Okay, understand how you make money, and But the point is always like focusing on what your life is going to be. That is avoiding you a lot of stress if you plan it that way, and it's going to be helping you to go closer to what you need, I guess. Because each of us needs something different.
Maybe you should have become a mathematics professor.
So I would have loved. I mean, I still like. Look, one of the reasons you and I, before we start this podcast, we were talking about music. One of the things I like about music is this, because music is mathematics. And there is so much of mathematics into music. And so once you start studying music from the jazz angle, from the angle of harmony and the melody and how the things combine together and all of that crazy stuff, you see the mathematics in things. That's why, for me, my hobbies are related to that. But I'm not good at emotional intelligence usually, even though I'm Italian, stuff like that. So I talk a lot, as you can see. But the point is, I still see the world as a cause and consequence in a way. So there is always a relationship with something. Yeah. So that's what I would tell everybody. For me, I cannot tell you that my plan ever worked, because you can imagine from what I said, nothing that I ever planned happened. Nothing.
What would you say you love about your job now?
What I do right now is something completely different from what I studied, but I found that everything that I studied was preparing me for this, because a PhD in fluid dynamics doesn't make you a fluid dynamicist. A PhD makes you a person that can solve problems. But I have these characteristics that it took me a while also to be very self-aware about it. What I do is that I go to customers that want to implement a specific software of SAP that deals with planning the supply chain, especially in processes like sales and operation planning, demand forecasting, inventory optimization, and stuff like that. And to me, that is just a mathematical game. It's just a model. And when I talk to a guy that comes from a different industry, so I had to analyze years ago uranium extraction. I can immediately see how I can use this mathematical model to apply it for something, because I see that stuff not as little pieces, but I see as a whole and in its own complexity. You touch a little thing here, what is the impact over there? Fluid dynamics is like that because you have boundary conditions, you have partial differential equations, stuff that's much more complex. This one is like a domino effect. Like something goes down and the other piece goes down, the other piece. So it's more like that. So yeah, I am into my natural environment with regard to the skill set that I have compared to what I need to do in my job. But the main thing and the reason why I like what I'm doing is that I don't have a boss. I am responsible of my own success and on my own failure. I'm an independent player. I don't have to be subject to the politics of large organization. I am shaping my organization in ways that people are not comfortable. I want my people to tell the truth. I am implementing values that may sound obsolete to people. We care about people. We think that people are humans and not robots. People make mistakes. I mean, all of these things in corporations are not really implemented that way. So you fit into a big machine and yeah, the good benefits, a lot of money, but I really don't care because if there is something good about this country is that entrepreneurship is something definitely possible here. I'm playing with gorillas. So my competitors are Ernst & Young, PricewaterhouseCoopers, but a guy like me was able to build a niche space for me and my team and my partner where everyone that plays in that space respects us for our intellectual abilities. In 10 years, we have served more than 50 customers. We have not screwed up an individual project. I also work with large companies. So I set up their process with my team. My first project was at ExxonMobil for the chemical division. So the good thing about that is that I learn about the culture in the United States, how is the South is different from California, from the Midwest, from New York. That's what I like.
So you're no longer working as an aeronautical engineer, but would you still say that the engineering major serves you well?
Yeah, but I think that the big game changer for what I do right now was the PhD for me. Because in my PhD, I had issues with the two professors I had to deal with. So I learned how to recognize certain situations people go through. And that's things sometimes I recognize in the industry as well right now where I am. So that's definitely one thing. But the PhD is really, in my opinion, a training where you are forced to solve a problem. You cannot look at anybody and say, hey, I have this problem, and people solve it for you. So you need to solve it yourself or you don't go through. So that is very useful in life in general, at least for the kind of personality I am. Compensate that a little bit with, team sports. So I was a volleyball player, so I learned also what is important of being a team and stuff like that. Then maybe if you're a man and you come from a macho society like we are, it's good to be exposed to point of view of women. So in fact, one of my best friends then work with me right now. She was an architect. After so many years, and I'm not an easy guy, as you can imagine, but she still works with me. Why? Because there is a respect that no matter where you come from and stuff is there. So I would say PhD to certain people is a good thing to do. I think people are too worried about GPA and results from the academic level, in my view. And what makes a person successful, at least from my perspective, is to be exposed to the right environments.
You gave fantastic advice. And it's been interesting to hear your insights from this age of wisdom, as you termed it.
The point is, the world is complicated and the school doesn't give us all the elements to understand it. So it's very hard if you always stay in the same place with the same group of people to challenge what you think and even to understand what works for you. So I think the United States has this that is a mind opener to many people. It can be shocking sometimes. It's very hard. But there are many good things in Europe too. You have less flexibility on the job, but once you are in a box, you typically are well equipped to run that job, which is always a risk because changing from one career to another in Europe is very difficult, while in the United States is pretty easy. I mean, look at me. I was a PhD in fluid dynamics, and then here I became an expert in supply chain planning. But in general, I mean, people are over worried when they're young. And one thing they need to learn is you get good at something if you put work into it. That's it. If you have the passion, you like it, and you put work into it, you can do pretty much anything. And it's not just a way of saying things. It's really true. And you shouldn't be talking about the finish line. You should be talking about the work you need to put into the things you want to do. Once you put the work, there is always a good outcome coming out. At least that's what I think. I mean, of course, you can be lucky, and you will see people being lucky that are going to go faster than you in life on certain things. But at the end of the day, I think the people that are happy is because, they put energy into something and they got back what they were expecting. And I hope everybody can be happy in the people listening to this wonderful podcast.
I hope so too. Thank you, Luca. And thank you to our listeners. This podcast is produced by Nina Lord and supported by Northern Virginia Community College. For information about engineering at NOVA, please visit us at nvcc.edu or on Instagram at EGR_AT underscore NOVA.